Okay, welcome to video number 6 in Module 301, Job Search Strategies. Now, before I start this video, which is all about cover letters and resumes, I want to point out that there are 2 separate videos in the course that will walk you through the specific step-by-step mechanics of completing your resume and your cover letter using the template document. This is a video much more about the general content or the value of these documents, and you should watch this before you step into the process of developing your cover letter or resume if possible. So cover letters are really how you make your first impressions because they literally are the covering or cover of your resume. And it is true that a HR manager will look at it before they look at your resume. And because of that, that very first impression relies on you being buttoned down and perfect. Spelling, grammar, legibility, formatting, and even the length of a letter count. It's very important that if you're responding to a posting or ad, that one of the very first things you do is show that you have what the people are looking for. So it's one of the very first things that you do is mention the key points about the credentials or qualifications they're seeking. It's also important to include your phone number and email address prominently. And of course that might seem very obvious, but believe it or not, I know people who have wondered why they weren't getting called by employers, and then they came to realize they had forgotten to include that information. Employers are imperfect, just like you. They might lose a page or two of your document. And so I'm going to show you a system that makes sure that your phone number and email are throughout the document in case that happens. Your cover letter should be actually quite concise. 3 to 4 paragraphs, no more or less, and it should be 1 page. It should not be overly slick, meaning you're not trying to sound like you're writing a commercial about yourself. It's important to be you and sound like you. It's a terrible idea to get somebody else to write your cover letter for you because you're going to sound different when you're on the phone or in an interview when you do that. So you also want to avoid things that are gimmicky, like colored paper or putting your photograph on your cover letter. Make sure you're yourself. Make sure that you show what really makes you unique. Attached to your cover letter will be your resume. Your cover letter changes for every single employer, but your resume usually stays the same, although it can be amended if you want to as well. Again, formatting, the length of your resume, the spelling, language, and neatness count. It turns out that people look at your resume literally for seconds before they decide to put it in the left-hand pile or the right-hand pile. And the left-hand pile is probably the pile that's closest to the garbage can. The right-hand pile is the pile that gets them looking at it more. So you have to make sure that you leave a good impression. In the old days, we used to sometimes submit covering letters in handwriting. That's not very common anymore, but we have never submitted resumes in any other way besides computerized or typed, so they have to be written in a professional font. Please don't worry again about having fancy stationery, just normal plain paper is the best way to go. And again, make sure that your phone number and address and email are prominent. And because of the fact that your resume is one that does not yet have a lot of content, you should consider adding a highlight section. Interestingly, for people like me who've been around for a long time in the field, I actually have a highlight section for the opposite reason. I want people to be able to see what's qualifying for them very quickly. Try to keep it less than 3 pages, and 2 is actually the best amount for most people. Your education and work highlights need to be focused on the job you're seeking. You might have worked in a shoe store or a hamburger joint along the way, but you don't want the employer to have to look through all of those other jobs to find the education and work highlights that really relate to them. So the system I like to get students using and the template we'll show you highlights those things and puts all the other experience in a separate section. Avoid using a one-size-fits-all resume or cover letter such as you might get at WorkBC. Those are good for people who are starting or looking for work in just about any profession, but the design I'm going to give you is suited to human services particularly. Make sure you always list both education and employment in the order of most recent to least recent. Make it concise and easy to read, and don't make everything on it bold, just a few headings or key things. Make sure that you address the required qualifications from the ad prominently in the resume. And you'll notice I've highlighted here or an advanced phone call. A really brilliant secret is to contact the agency before you submit a resume and speak to somebody, preferably a supervisor or a human resources manager, and ask them this simple question. What do you value most in applicants? Or what things do you like to see be prominent on resumes? Give them your name. And when you do your cover letter, you'll be able to actually reference that conversation in your cover letter. You'll have another point of contact with the person who will likely be hiring you and make yourself more memorable. And you'll also demonstrate that you're an initiative-taking, organized type of person. And of course, proofread or get somebody else to proofread your resume when you're done, especially if you know that you have technical issues that sometimes cause you to have computer glitches or if spelling's not your strong suit. Some application do's and don'ts. You should apply in many places at once. It's totally normal to do that. You should apply in places that have not yet posted. In fact, most organizations do not post all of their openings. They only post the permanent or long-term ones most of the time. And often the internal organizational posts are taken by people who are there first, and they're always looking for casual people. Check the HRDC or Employment Canada website and other websites. There's all kinds of them online, like Indeed, for example. And actually ask people at their offices where they post those jobs. They may be actually on their websites. More and more agencies are doing that. There's fewer and fewer jobs in local newspapers, but there are some. Craigslist and other places may also have jobs. As I said earlier, it's a great idea to phone first and find out their preferred way of receiving applications. Make sure that you include references, certificates, and any reference letters that you may have, unless they tell you they don't want them yet. Apply quickly. If you know that something has a 1-week opening period, make sure you're one of the first resumes to show up on their desk. If you're allowed to submit electronically, do that and do it fast. And if you're able to go by in person and drop off a resume, that's always a nice touch, even if you've already sent it electronically, because it's one more opportunity to have your face be associated with that document. And something that many people overlook, but there are people out there, and I have done this work myself, who are asked to do a scan of the social media presence of every applicant. If your social media shows pictures of you out partying and drinking, there's a very good chance that that's going to weigh poorly against your opportunity to find a job. So go out there and clean up those accounts, or get rid of them entirely if you can't. Don't lie on a resume, ever, or even exaggerate. Don't write resumes as though they were essays. Point form with simple headings is what we're looking for. Don't make it lengthy or over-formatted, as I said. A little bit of italics or underlining goes a long way. Don't forget to check for errors, as we've spoken of. And don't make yourself difficult to contact. For example, if you're a person who writes your phone number as your easiest way of being contacted, but you almost never answer your phone, that could be the simple reason why you're not getting your job. When people are contacting others to try and arrange interviews, they often move right past a person who doesn't answer their phone until they find somebody who can give them an immediate answer about taking an interview. It's one of the most common issues I've seen. Similarly, if you've asked to be contacted by email, make sure you're checking your email every hour at least. Don't write a limiting header or aim on your resume. This is something that some employment support agencies will encourage you to do. But in human services and education, it's not a good idea. Your cover letter is already an opportunity for you to say what you value in your work. But if you write something at the top of your resume that isn't the same name as what the employer calls that job, then they're going to put your resume in the shredder right off the bat. I've had that experience many times myself. Somebody applies to be a resident care attendant on an organization or on their header, and my organization doesn't have resident care attendants. So it's better off to just leave your resume open and let the letter do the specifics. Don't use a tone that's too formal or too informal. So if you look at the format I've given you, you should be in good shape. Don't apply if you don't have the availability that they'll really need, or if you don't have the requested qualifications. People will find that will think that you are trying to be dishonest if you apply even though they've specified that you must have certain qualifications. And it might sound strange, but you should probably go back and make sure that your email address sounds professional. I've had people have email addresses that they created when they were teenagers, and they often make them sound less mature or even refer to things like drinking or alcohol and drugs use. So it's important for people to go back and make sure that their email address sounds and looks professional, and also that it's simple and memorable. How can you make a good impression when you're doing your job search? Make an advance call or visit for more information. Research the agency at the library, and if you know any staff who work there, ask them about it. If there's an ad or posting, study it. Get a sense of what the organization is looking for instead of just the technical. If somebody that you know works there and they're able to put in a good word for you, it's a good idea, but make sure there's somebody the employer actually respects. When you show up for your interview, don't show up an hour early and don't show up a minute early. 20 to 30 minutes is pretty much the standard. Dress formally, as we said earlier, meaning nicer than you would actually ever dress for the job. And don't worry about whether you're a little bit nervous. As we said, make sure your hygiene is on point. Brush your teeth and put on extra deodorant because you're going to get nervous. Bring extra copies of references, certificates, letters, and your resume, even if you've already submitted them. Sometimes it's helpful to be able to hand them to people right there in the interview. Even if they never call for them, the fact that you came in with something shows them that you're prepared. When you meet people, one of the hardest things sometimes to do is to remember their names. They shake their hand, you're nervous, and you have this mental moment of, oh, it's time. But it's important for you to try and take note of people's first names, or if they give you their last names, and to use them occasionally as you're sitting in the interview. If you're not sure what terminology the agency uses, for example, to refer to the people they support, then ask them that question rather than saying the wrong thing. If you don't know an answer during the interview, it's okay to say so, but then say you'd like to try your best to take a guess or to figure it out. When you give your answers, try to keep them concise, but usually people aren't looking for one word or one sentence answers. They're looking for you to give essentially a paragraph. And if you can keep it organized and do some of the things we've talked about for your panel exam preparation, you'll be in good shape. Be prepared for all kinds of questions, not just questions about your proficiency as a CSW, but questions about your personal growth, about what you want in your life are a good example as well. And be prepared with a few questions for yourself about the agency, even if you already know most of what you need, just to see how people answer. Be upbeat and enthusiastic. Come in ready to show that you are a person who has a desire to be there. Smile. Have a sense of humor. Think your way through the questions, and that means usually pausing, even for a few seconds before answering. During the interview, you may get something wrong or see that you said something that doesn't exactly fit with what the employer wants. In fact, we used to ask a question of candidates that was almost always answered wrong. And we did it so that we could give them some feedback and see how they took the feedback. Make sure that you take feedback well, because it's a huge contributor to how people will see you. If you have questions, make sure that you frame them in a non-defensive manner. For example, rather than say, are you the kind of organization where people can never talk to the boss? Change it to, how much access will I have to the people who will supervise me? Or, do you have an open door policy? The same question asked in that more polite way will go a lot further. It is a good practice to call later on that day and say thank you to the employer or send a quick email, but don't pester them. I've had people send me thank you letters or flowers, and frankly, it made me feel quite uncomfortable, and it was just plain strange. Don't call and pester the interviewer about when they're going to call you back. So it's a really bad habit, and I've seen people erase a good interview because of by doing that. Don't over-disclose your personal information. It's one of the most common mistakes people make, to go in and talk about all of their health issues, their family problems, and so forth. If you're asked a question that requires you to give some of that information, give as much as you need to be honest and forthright, but don't go on at length about yourself personally, especially if you're not asked. All right, it's time to wrap this one up with another blog entry. And this time we want you to think about references. What questions do you think your references will be asked about you? And what sort of person do you think will make a good reference? Take a moment and write those on the web blog.